So we all know Caribou, right? The problematic mud man whose Japanese devil fruit name invokes some very old-timey dancing. But you know what's super interesting about him is that he keeps coming back into the story, and even now he's a major part of Egghead, one part that a lot of people have most likely forgotten about, and will most likely be very important very soon, because it's highly theorized that he is the one who gave Luffy the food and has stowed him away. So here's the thing. We're not really going to talk about him and Egghead. That's not the point of this video. The point of this video is that he is actually a revolutionary who has forgotten who he is. So you may be asking, what do you mean by that bug man on the internet? Well, the subject of this takes us to Caribou's cover story, which is really weird that this random guy from the start of the time skip gets his own cover story, a very long one too. It goes from chapter 674 to chapter 731, so it's massive. And then from that point forward, he stays in the story, which is even more ridiculous. But anyway, Caribou's key in the New World is just a cover story of the events that happened after Fishman Island. He is acting problematic again. He then is captured by Jinbei. Then the G5 have him after Jinbei takes him there. Then his boys from the Wet-Haired Pirates, his brother, and a few of their weird A Clockwork Orange type looking cronies come to save him. He takes the ship, and from that point in chapter 687 is actually the first time that we get to see him act like a normal Logia, because as a user of the Bog Bog fruit, or the Numa Numa no Mi, he is able to turn into mud. And as he's leaving on the ship, he is shot. But then we get a little itty bitty baby panel of the bullets just splattering in him. So this is the first time we actually get to see his normal Logia regeneration in action, which I just think is personally very neat. And I was quite dumbfounded that we haven't really seen that up to this point, at least in the manga. There's like one scene, I believe, in the anime, but you know, anime is kind of hard to quantify as canon or as being important from time to time. So that's good. That's good. I'm happy that happens. So he makes his great escape. He gets shipwrecked. His beautiful deer mounted ship is taken by the ocean. He escapes on a lifeboat, ends up in this weird winter island with metal trees, which is odd, and is taken in by a kindly grandmother. The grandmother sends him off with a meat pie, but then as he comes into town, he realizes that he bears a very strong resemblance to the revolutionary leader Ganbaru. And except for the swirly goatee, he is a dead ringer. So the town, however, is being ravaged by Kaido's boys, of whom we first encountered with X Drake during, I want to say, the tail end of the pre-time skip. And his name is Iron Boy Scotch, who is a member of the Beast Pirates and is overseeing one of Kaido's favorite islands, which is running a weapons factory. So I assume, if you want to connect this back to Onigashima and the events of Wano as a whole, all of Queen's like weaponry and whatnot, and the weaponry that the Beast Pirates were using, were probably being shipped out of this factory. It is most likely one of many factories around the New World. Okay. So Caribou actually ends up seeing all the bad that Scotch is doing. He burns the rebellion flag. He quiets the rebellion completely. He burns down a grandmother's house. And in his cowardice, Caribou runs until his boys come back with the marine vessel. From that point, Caribou takes up the mantle of Ganbaru with his brother. He eats Scotch, which is crazy, and he eats the entire weapons factory, which is still inside of him, now that I think about it, because he never spits it back up. We never see that. So I don't know if once he's captured by Drake at the end of the cover story, do they take possession of the fact within him and put it in Wano or Onigashima or somewhere? Don't know about that. But here's the interesting point. there is a very, very subtle shift in this cover story. Caribou, for the longest, has always been associated with consumption. It is highly interesting to me that he goes from consuming people and weapons when he's on Fishman Island to actually being associated with food after this cover story. And it all starts when the grandmother of Ganbaru gives him the meat pie. Because from that point forward, he has the meat pie in the cover story. Then he's responsible for giving Luffy food in Onigashima. And during his time in the Udon prisoner mine before that, food was seen as reward for doing hard labor. So he was in a place in which food was a reward. He then stockpiled food for Luffy so he can gain his strength back. And now, potentially, in Egghead, he has given Luffy food again and is most likely acting as sanctuary so Luffy can get his strength back again. Now, going back to the cover story, we do see a grave for Ganbaru. So it's left up in the air if he's dead or not. It's very unclear because it's a wanted poster pinned to the grave, and then the grave is metallic and has flowers beneath it, and we see the grandmother praying to the grave, and Caribou's boys are in shock. Caribou, way back in the start of the time skip, was obsessed with graves for Marines who got on his bad side. So it's weird. It's weird that we have an exclamation point for the end of the cover story is a shovel exclamation point. So that in itself is just kind of weird that we're dialing back to this ideal that he was introduced with. And now that we have the grandmother praying to a grave to somebody who looks like him. But what's weird about this is that the ground is also metallic. So how in the world could he be buried in metal? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So I don't think this is an actual grave, but more so a memorial to Ganbaru wherever he is. The irony in that too is that when Caribou and the boys are introduced in chapter 600, right after Caribou skewers a Marine, he too prays before his brother starts digging a grave for the Marine. So I find that too very interesting. Also, it's just generally kind of ironic that a man who looks like Caribou is supposed to be buried, but his grave is not in the dirt. It's in some sort of metal landscape, though Caribou himself is a man technically made out of dirt. He's a mud man. So it's funny that the supposed guy who looks like the mud man is buried in metal, which makes me think this is just a memorial. It's not necessarily a real grave. However, let's talk about why Caribou is actually a revolutionary. The thing about One Piece is that likeness matters. When a character looks like another character or a character looks like a reference to another character, it usually means something. Either it's plot relevant or it's a plot relevant gag. With Caribou, it surrounds him almost entirely with every arc he is in, with the very small exception of Fishman Island. Fishman Island has a very weak likeness comparison, I would say, in this example, because the only thing that we can see is Fishman being forced to besmirch the likeness of Otahime by stepping on her picture. However, in Shaboni Archipelago, in the pre-time skip, there, of course, is a big plot point with Duval looking like the poorly drawn Sanji wanted poster. Then, in the return to Shaboni Archipelago, we have the fake Luffy and the fake Straw Hats posing as Luffy and the real Straw Hats, and Caribou joins up with them and ends up supposedly murdering one of them. The fake Sanji, his name is Drip. He suffocates him, which is wild. But anyway, it's very intriguing that this surrounds him here. And then we have his cover story in which he is compared to somebody else. And he's a dead ringer for that person. Following that, in Wano, what do we have? We have Yamato trying to be Odin, trying to imbue herself with Odin's likeness. So she too, in that way, is like a imposter, much like the fake Straw Hats. Following that, we also have Kandro, who did make up a clone of Odin to try to fool the other Scabbards. So he too played the role of imposter as he was trying to make a clone that looked like somebody else, which makes a lot of sense because he has a background in theater. He is a performer. So he too is another point in a character trying to copy the likeness of another character. In this case, much like Yamato, it goes back to Odin. Still talking about Odin, let's talk about the Wano of the past, in which we have the Kurozumi granny, who was the user of the clone fruit before Mr. 2, who was very plot relevant as she used her powers to actually move the plot along and to make Orochi the shogun. And this also in turn led to Odin's death because as posing as Momonosuke, she was able to distract Odin for a second, which allowed Kaido to get the jump on him. In Egghead, where he appears again, of course, we have the entire Seraphim subplot in which the Seraphim are clones of pre-existing characters, and they're all younger versions of those characters. So clones and imposters and just likeness in general, imagery of other characters, kind of revolves around Caribou. So it wouldn't be a surprise that there is something more to him actually looking like somebody else. Because these things, when they happen, especially in a serious manner in which it was presented, it's most likely not a gag. It's something very, very real. So here's what I think it is. First off, Caribou and Caribou, his brother, aren't actually brothers. I think both of them are leaders of a revolutionary army. And Caribou really is Gambaru, and he has been a victim of hypnotism as well as his brother. Now, hypnotism in One Piece is a very powerful tool for doing a variety of things, like making people believe that they are other people or erasing memory completely. What's funny about this, going back to that whole similarity thing that I mentioned earlier, way back in the East Blue, Captain Kuro hypnotized Captain Morgan with the use of Django to make him believe that the Black Cat Pirate's shipwright, who looks a lot like Captain Kuro, was actually Captain Kuro, and then that Captain Morgan had captured him. They also hypnotized the shipwright into believing he too was Captain Kuro. So again, we have similarity coming back into the forefront, and now we're associated with hypnotism. So what if Caribou came across a hypnotist in his travels, and then that hypnotist made him believe that he was a pirate? And I assume that his brother too might have been around for this as well. So now both of them strongly believe they are pirates. Then they completely abandon their hometown and the troubles that may have started to crop up there to go off to be pirates. Then they end up being very popular and powerful pirates that become the supernovas of that year. What could have happened too, alternatively, is that Gabaru and supposedly a high-ranking subordinate that he sees as a brother could have met this hypnotist, and this hypnotist could have given them both amnesia. And much like Sabo, a lot of bits and pieces of their lives are fragmented and or missing. But what they do is that due to their nature, they don't resort to joining the Marines or sort of getting trapped into a large governing body. They still strike out as their own men and become pirates, because piracy would be the only equivalent thing to being a revolutionary. You're not under the thumb of the world government. You aren't taking orders from the Marines. You are your own person and you sell your own flag. So in that situation, I can see how a revolutionary with amnesia would then go to piracy, because the two are very similar, though probably outside forces and or methods he had done as a revolutionary kind of maybe bent him into being a bad pirate. However, he has the capacity to be a good person, which is very odd for somebody like him, because characters that are similar to him who have done very heinous acts like Caesar Clown or Vince Smoke Judge don't really change their stripes. They just move in a different direction. However, he does a complete 180 on his mission objective. And everything he does at the tail end of that cover story is a net positive. It is of good intention that he doesn't need to do. It's completely beyond him to have to do any of what he's just done. In fact, seeing as how his brother came back with a stable vessel, he could have left the granny and the town to the tyranny of Scotch, but he didn't. He ended up saving them and freeing them of their tyranny, because not only did he remove Scotch, he ate the whole factory. So there's no more hard labor to be had, because the area of hard labor no longer exists. So that's what makes me think that there is more to Caribou. I think he's actually Gambaru. And what's so interesting about Gambaru's name is that Gambaru has had a lot of names as he has existed in the canon. Gambaru is the canon name, of course, but he's also been called Gobble, which is very funny considering he is eating a meat pie in his photograph. And what does Caribou do? He gobbles up people. That's the main use of his ability. Consumption, consuming. Then another name for Gambaru is Gabul. Gabul contains the word bull in it. Bulls and caribou, which are the deer animal that Caribou is named after, are related. They're both of the same type of animal. So it's very interesting that even Gambaru's unofficial names in a way lead back to Caribou. Now, I am aware that there is a small section in the cover story in which Caribou reminisces about him and his brother as children receiving lollipops from their grandmother. But what's weird about this is that this occurs during a time in which Caribou is helping out a grandmother who is Gambaru's grandmother. So it feels like this is a false memory because it has too much relation to the events of the cover story. Because like in the cover story, Caribou meets a grandmother who then gives him food as a token of health, much like the grandmother presented in Caribou's thoughts, who gives it to lollipops as to say they shouldn't fight. So it's weird how this memory relates back to the events that are happening now, which makes me think this might not be real because it's too similar. It's a fill-in for information that Caribou doesn't necessarily have. Now, as for the future of the character, it can go in a couple of directions, but if the events of Egghead lead him down a path in which he is helping Luffy yet again, and therefore helping the Warrior of Liberation, I can only see Caribou being a good character from here on out, because now you're aiding the idea of freedom. You're aiding the idea of liberation in the face of one of the greatest powers in the world, being Saturn, which in turn means that the only possible outcome for him I can see is that he is revealed to be Gambaru, or he joins the Revolutionary Army and he pieces himself back together and realizes that he is Gambaru. I think that is the most likely outcome for this character. Now, if we get real deep into theory piece, I think based on the video I made about Ivankov being evil, there is a very high possibility that the Revolutionary Army is destroyed and goes under a reconstruction period under the guise of Sabo. So, as Sabo as the new leader, Ganbaru, previously Caribou, would be a very valuable asset to building up the new Revolutionary Army's ranks, if the Revolutionary Army as we know it under Dragon does indeed topple. But with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching.